right. So at this point, I believe we get into the lesson. Is that right, Meg? Looking for the yay. Okay. All right. So I am Kenneth Scott, and most of you I've met and seen before, and most of you, if not all of you, know my wife, Jessica Merlin. And so today what I'd like to talk to you about, really three things that I'd like to touch on. One is this interesting thing that's occurred for myself and Jessica through our lives. There's a common thread of unity, this organization. It keeps showing up in our lives. And so I'll be sharing that as I tell part of my story. Also, this concept that I've been working with and thinking on of both science and spirituality converging toward truth from somewhat opposing perspectives, or at least different techniques. And then finally, the thing I'd like to talk about is the concept of a mental model of reality, which was in the bio that was read earlier. And so I'll start right at the beginning of where I began my journey. In 2011, I finished my degree in mechanical engineering, and I had achieved all the material milestones I had set out in front of myself. I had the job I wanted. I had all the material boxes were checked. And Jessica introduced me to this docu-movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? How many people have seen that video? All right, I thought there might be a few hands raised up in this community that have seen that movie. And I was, in that time, extremely left-brain, analytical. I was the prototypical engineer, corporate engineer. But I was intrigued by the new information that was being presented in that movie, and particularly physics. I had just graduated college, so I had been trained in physics in the Navy when I was younger, and then I had just taken classes in quantum mechanics. And yet I'd never been exposed to some of the information that has been presented in that movie. And so I started studying this new science, what I'll call the new science. And what I believe is at that moment, as I started to acquire new information, I started to evolve my mental model of reality. Now, I'll give you a short definition of what that is. So mental, the word meaning of the mind, and model, meaning typically a three-dimensional representation, often smaller, of an actual physical thing. So when I combine those two as mental model, what I say is it's a four-dimensional, because we have time included in our mind, a four-dimensional model of reality that we have in our mind. And we use this four-dimensional model of reality to predict the future, to analyze the past, to make decisions on what's right and wrong, what's true and what's false in our lives. And so through the acquiring of new information, I was evolving, changing my mental model of reality. And there's three specific areas that I want to talk to about how I was changing my mental model of reality, and three, very shortly, just cover some of the change in science by juxtaposing the two. First, we'll start with physics. So physics made a large change around the turn of the 19th century. So in the early 1900s, we were starting to explore the very, very fine pieces of physics. And so you can look at physics in two realms. On one side, you had Newtonian physics, and Newtonian physics was very celebrated because it was, on the surface, explaining very well how the material world functioned. So if I knew all the variables associated with it, I could throw a football through the air, and science could predict the trajectory, the path of that football. It knew the energy associated with it, the aerodynamics, it could all be calculated. and very, very precisely tell you how that football would move through space. The other is quantum physics. Now, quantum physics diverges from Newtonian physics because it measures the very, very small, and the very, very small does not act like the very, very large. So if you try to measure the path of an electron, you can't. You can have all the information, but you don't know what its next move will be. It doesn't follow a smooth trajectory like a football. And so quantum physics is more about what we don't know, the unknown, the unpredictable. And Newtonian physics is more about what we do know, what we can predict, and what is known. Both models are very helpful and very relevant and very useful. But I was moving from this engineer mind, you can imagine, who thought I knew so much, had so many answers for how things work and where things go, towards this model where you can't know. You're not supposed to know. And it's unpredictable. And it's in this realm, though, is infinite possibilities. Over here are limited probabilities. So that's one scientific change from limitation to possibility. The second realm was in genetics and the new science of epigenetics. And so the old science of common genetics, which was genetic determinism, was based on the idea that DNA, so DNA, the double helix, celebrated in the early 50s as containing all the information necessary to create you, to create all of life. And it was believed at that point that since this was the code was turned into RNA, and the RNA became protein, and protein was the building blocks of life. And so it was genetic determinism. Your genes determined who you would become. And so things started coming up like, well, that's what I got from my father. It's in my genes. I just have bad genes. Or that person has good genes. Why do I have these genes? And they got skinny genes. I got fat genes. All these things we started to associate with genetics and say genetics were the reason why we were. So it became very, I would say, a victim mentality, that I was given these genes and these genes are who I am, and I will be like my father was before me. And then epigenetics, which literally means above the gene. Because what happens is that the double helix is wrapped around histone groups, and those histone groups can actually change their shape and open and close so that more code can be read or less code can be read. And outside of the DNA, there are methyl groups, and those methyl groups can attach and detach, covering or exposing new information, DNA. And all that interaction is controlled by the external environment of the cell. So the cell is sensing its environment, sending information into the DNA and changing that chemistry so that different codes can be read. And the environment of the cell is your internal environment. So how you think, how you act, and how you feel impacts the external environment of the cell, which affects the information that goes into the cell, which affects how DNA is read. And so, yes, it's true that it goes from DNA to RNA to protein, but what's accessible is it can be changed moment by moment. And so epigenetics tells us that we have a level of control over our genetic destiny by changing our behaviors and by changing our internal environment or the external environment of the cell, because really all we are is a community of cells. The you that I'm talking to, that you remember, the same you that has a lineage all the way through your life. You can remember who you are through those phases, and yet I can tell you your cells change constantly. You have 100,000 new cells being produced every second. So you're not physically the same. You're not the same person. You're a community of cells. And what you tell yourself you are has a huge impact on who you become. And so once again, we're going from limitation to possibility. And then the final section that I wanted to talk to is neuroscience. So neuroscience is probably the newer of all those. And what we understand now is that the brain is very changeable. The old model, again limiting, was that once your brain was wired in a specific way and was fully developed, which is shortly after in your late 20s or mid 20s, you were done. And that is what you had. You had the mind you had. And you get sayings like you can't teach an old dog new tricks and these types of things because that's what we believe. That's what we could understand at that time. But the new science says is that the brain is neuroplastic, which means it can rewire itself, and you're doing it every time you acquire new information. And that happens up until the moment we pass on and transition to the next phase. And so once again, we move from a space of limitation to possibility, that in all of these changes in science, these evolutions, as science on its trajectory moves closer and closer to truth, what we're finding is that it's moving away from limitation and towards possibility. And then it's moving away from separation towards unity. And I realized that as on that trajectory, because that's the path I was on, as I moved closer and closer to truth, that there was another trajectory that was another path of individuals who are on a spiritual path, who by means, through their own means, through inward perspection, through the review of ancient texts and going inward, we're also learning more and more about truth through a different way. And that as we became closer, it became easier for me as a left brain engineer with new information to leap over to a spiritual path and to become a more whole person and to have my feet in both paths and to be moving with both paths closer to truth. And I was doing that by evolving my mental model of reality. And so that's become a passion for me, is to share this new science and share this new information and to help individuals evolve their mental model of reality closer and closer to truth. And so now is where I'll move on more into my story. So with this new information, I, as you can imagine, began making changes in my life. Jess and I began making different decisions and prioritizing things in a different way, becoming less materialistic and becoming more spiritualistic. And we moved to Traverse City. I moved away from that corporate path. I was no longer climbing the ladder. I was looking for my purpose, looking for what it was I could do that would bring me joy. And in 2015, or in 2012, actually towards the end of 2012, we did an intensive workshop with Dr. Joe Dispenza on the line, and it was just a webinar. And that webinar was recorded, I'll find out later, at Unity of Houston. And so that was my first time in a Unity congregation. I didn't know it, but I was watching these teachings and learning more in a Unity community through the internet, basically. And so in 2015, fast forward, we're in Traverse City now, and Jess becomes very clear in her mind and actually writes down on a piece of paper the type of job she wants. She wants to work part-time, and she wants to serve a community, and she wants it to be close by. And that very same day, she comes across an ad at Unity of Traverse. And she responds to that ad. And within an hour, I believe, Eileen would correct me if she was here, but within an hour, I believe, Eileen responds and says, "Could you come here today?" Because she was very anxious to fill that position. She had gone through a lot and had not yet found or had a solidified a candidate. And so Jess said, "Absolutely, I can." And lo and behold, it was right down the road, very close. And lo and behold, it was serving a community. And and lo and behold, it was part-time. And there might be some other factors Justin wrote down if she were here. She's actually teaching yoga right now, her other passion. She could fill in the details. And so Unity showed up in our lives again and just became the program's coordinator at Unity in Meg's position now. And you guys know us from that capacity. Also in 2015, Justin and I made a huge spiritual leap, and we invested in a meditation and yoga retreat in Costa Rica. And this was shortly after Jess took that position, about 2 months later. And I met a reverend from Unity of Ohio at that event. And that was a huge shift for me because I realized how dark my vision of religion and organized communities of people being spiritual had become. And this beautiful person, we were sharing quantum physics. And I just realized how jaded I had become, and it really opened me up to be open to a community. And so there's the third time Unity has shown up in my life. And so fast forward, actually at that event, I made a declaration that I'm a singer-songwriter. And I wasn't much of one at that. I just delved playing acoustic cover songs and whatnot. So fast forward to 2018, and I'm invited to play my music at the 35th anniversary Gala for Unity. And it was a huge moment in my life and just a springboard for me in confidence. It was the perfect venue for me. My message is very spiritual. It's my information. It's my heart coming through the music. And I had, without like thousands, but 100 or so, maybe in that round, of focused, loving, attention-filled individuals watching and listening to my words. I'd played that summer in several bars, and it just wasn't resonating with me. And after that event, I stopped trying to play in bars and stuff. So man, Unity shows up again. And now here we are on my other path of wanting to disseminate this new information and to promote this idea that we as human beings are given a gift. And it's beyond the gift of life. It's a gift of this mental model of reality that gives us the opportunity to pause and become aware of what we have habitually done in our past, what we were taught and learned over the course of our life that may or may not resonate anymore with us. We acquire things at youth like a sponge. And the individuals and the circumstances in our environment that we download during that time, we're not responsible for the acquisition, but we're responsible for having it. And as we continue as individuals to acquire new information and evolve our mental model of reality and upgrade our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors to be in line with a higher version of self, a vision of self that we hold so true in our mind's eye that we literally become that physically. And it shows up in our lives tangibly. And so it's not surprising to me that the first time I was ever asked to be a guest speaker, it was by Rev Eileen and this community. And I'm so honored and so privileged to be here. And I feel like I have this surrogate family that somehow knows when I'm ready for that next step. Was there when I didn't even know who they were, and were there when I knew what I wanted, and kept showing up with opportunities for me to stand up and live that truth. And it's all because I embraced possibility. I embraced these new sciences and said, I can be somebody different, because that's what the new sciences say. They said we are creators. We're the creators of our destiny. And it says that that same intelligence that gives us life and creates everything that we get to experience wants us to create. It wants us to experience life so that it can experience life through us. To have new experiences is to evolve the soul. And to evolve the soul is to teach a higher consciousness what it can know about itself. I'm so honored and privileged to be here, as I said. And what my message is concisely is this, is that we as human beings, we not only have a gift, but we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to continue to bring in new information and to continue those arcs towards truth. And in reality, we may never, ever get there. But as we pursue it, as we move forward, and as we evolve ourselves as individuals, we give ourselves a new perspective, a new mental model of reality. And inside that new mental model of reality is the solutions to every single challenge that we have created from a lesser mind. I believe unity represents part of that other trajectory that I didn't get to experience until a later time in my life. I think unity and I have crossed because we have been pursuing the same truth through a different perspective. And I'm happy to say that I share that perspective more so today than at any point in my life. And I'm happy to say that even though I may not show up on a weekly basis, there's a place in my heart, and there's unity is there. And I'm sure that this journey with the two of us will continue as I continue to evolve and as unity as a community continues to evolve. And so that's my message. If it's a lesson, I hope that's helpful. It's my heart, and it's what I have to say. And there's one, I guess I'll finish with one more thing, another science, and that's the science of the heart. Quantum physics talks about fields of potential, fields of energy, and those fields determine reality. And your heart creates an electromagnetic field that is measurable. So your heart, scientifically, is in constant communication with the field of information that creates all of its existence. And so what the sages have always said, what indigenous people have always said, that life, the biggest journey you'll ever make is from your head to your heart, is telling you that when you listen to your heart, you're listening to a greater intelligence because you are tied to it through a magnetic field. And we know from cell phones how much information can transfer over a magnetic field. And that's what I have to say. Thank you so much for this opportunity.